From the WNIN Tri-State Public Media Center in downtown Evansville, I'm David James, and this is 2 Main Street. Only sleeping. We're taking a walk through cemeteries and graveyards to find out what tombstones and grave symbols tell us about life, death, and faith. Sounds morbid, but stay with me. This will be a spiritual and secular adventure. Only sleeping is a wake-up call to the living. More on that in a moment, but first some background. There's a growing fascination with this underground topic called necrotourism. You may be a necrotourist if you enjoy the history, genealogy, statuary, famous graves, grand landscaping, or just a calm, peaceful setting. Those supporting this tourism remind us that many cemeteries were often the first city parks. And if deceased didn't want you to see or visit their graves, these graves wouldn't be so different or so elaborate. Now, here's a good question to start off the show. Is a graveyard different from a cemetery? Now, we tend to use the same words to define a burial ground, but graveyards are often right next to a church, in the churchyard. In the 19th century, these church graveyards started filling up. New burial sites were needed. Larger plots of land, usually away from the city center, were created. Cemeteries, from the Greek word meaning dormitory or resting place. Now, here to share his research and journeys to graveyards and cemeteries is Reverend Allen Rutherford, pastor of St. John's Episcopal Church in Mount Vernon, Indiana. So welcome, Allen.
Thank you.
Now, you told me your fascination with tombstones and grave symbols began when you were growing up in a small town in central Indiana. Where in central Indiana?
St. Paul, Indiana. It's on the split between the county line in Decatur County and Shelby County. Exit 123, Interstate 74. So plug to my hometown.
How far from Indianapolis is?
It's about an hour drive, maybe, not quite.
Now, White Rock Park, is that a famous site there in Decatur? Have you been there?
I didn't. No, didn't.
Oh, now where did you hang out in St. Paul?
Everywhere, rivers. Any place you could fish and hunt
and cemeteries were on that list too.
No, my first memories of being in cemeteries was, it used to be tradition that. I can remember as a little child, my mother and my grandmothers on Memorial Weekend, they would save their juice cans and they'd wrap them in colored foil or whatever, and then they would clip irises and peonies, however you want to pronounce it, and other spring flowers and put those in there, and then they would go around visiting different cemeteries or grave sites at churches, graveyards, and just put flowers on relatives' graves.
I remember that too as a youngster with my grandparents, and that was a big deal. And you had to gather all the cans together, and you went to like 2 or 3 different cemeteries because your great aunt's over there, and somebody else was on this cemetery. So
right, when you grow up with a Baptist family and a Roman Catholic family, you got to visit, both of them.
That's right. Now, in the Episcopal Diocese, you're given time off from your pastoral duties to go on sabbaticals. Now, you've told me you've made some trips to England and Scotland, and that's when you started noticing these unusual symbols?
Well, my first experience of that was my daughter graduated from Butler University in 2009, and she got an opportunity to get a job and move to Boston. And we went out there to visit her one summer, and of course she showed us around. Went downtown and different tourist sites, and there was a very old church, and we went in and toured the church. But then I was interested in the graveyard because I thought, okay, this is really old, so there's got to be some really cool-looking gravestones in here, and that's where I first encountered like skull and crossbones and funky-looking heads and those kinds of things. And some of those dated back to, 1700s and even, late, 1600s. And, and then...
Because that tradition probably came over from the old country.
Yeah, it did come over from England. This is very puritanical Congregationalist area and in Boston. And so, but in 2015, I had an opportunity, had gotten a grant to take a sabbatical and was gone 4 months. And it was, the theme of it was kind of tracing my family roots. I'm Scottish, but also, though I wanted to, while I was over in Great Britain, I wanted to see Canterbury Cathedral in Kent, southeast England. But I also kind of wanted to do this little thing where I compared, I'm passionate about little parish churches, but so to me, the difference between like a cathedral is the immanence of God, and whereas the big cathedrals is the transcendence of God, because you get that the upward feel of to heaven.
Those Gothic
right, but
structures.
But all these little intimate parishes, they're kind of the immanence. God is intimately present, with the people in these places. So I want to do this little comparison of contrast between a big cathedral and what it has, and the little parish, local churches and all of that, and it was interesting over there that all these little stone churches, they're all stone churches. And I'd asked somebody, I said, do you have any wooden churches? And they said, oh, they burnt down, centuries ago they burnt down. And then they just built these stone, and they're almost like cookie cutter, from the outside, but hardly any of them are unlocked. And so you go inside, and inside there are just jewels on the inside.
Now, you say small. How many people would be in one of those churches?
Well, with Christianity being on the decline, probably the seating capacity is anywhere from 50 to 100, depending on the size. Because a lot of these are real rural, out in the middle of nowhere, and over there they have what they call the parish system, meaning that every little community is considered. Over here we call, like the Catholic Church and the Episcopal Church and so on, we call the church the parish. But and if you think about New Orleans, they talk about parish down there, this parish, that parish. But it's really, the parish is the community, and then it's the church that serves that community is also, so you have the parish, the community, and parish, the church itself. But then they all have these graveyards that go with them, very old graveyards. And then also in the inside of these churches, you have people that are maybe with the wealthier that are buried in the floor, or they have memorials, actually in the floor or on the walls of the church or churches. And so
now there's one unique church that you mentioned in your presentation, St. Leonard's Church, and you have some photos from St. Leonard's Church. And what part of England is that located? Or is that in England or Scotland?
No, that's down in Kent. It's not far from the coast. Mm-hmm. Dungeness Bay. It's near Dungeness Bay. Mm-hmm.
And what makes this church so interesting? And I guess probably the graveyard, the churchyard.
Well, yeah.
In the graveyard.
At some point, they had wanted to expand their church building, but they were surrounded by their graveyard. So what they did was, in the space where they wanted to build their new addition, they dug up the graves and they saved the bones. But then they have this catacomb in the back of it, in a basement, and so they have these skeletons on the walls, and stacks of like leg bones and arm bones that are as tall, 6 foot tall, and a room long, and very deep.
So these aren't identified? They're just...
No, they are all pretty much all identified.
How do they do that?
Well, they just meticulously, when they, dug them up, they cataloged them. And it's fascinating, too, that they've had medical teams come in, and archaeologists come in. and do research on them to kind of see. They can tell what the diets of the people were, back in those days. They can tell from the bones if people had particular diseases, some with, spina bifida or, curvature of spine, those kinds of things. And, they can tell if somebody, died of kind of natural causes, or, if they have a big hole in their head, maybe they were murdered or killed, right. Or,
Now, there's like a wall of skulls, too.
Right, exactly, yeah.
So that had to be interesting to see that for the first time.
It was creepy and interesting. I wasn't scared or anything, but it was just fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Did you see that by yourself?
Yeah, I saw it by myself.
Okay.
Yeah, right. And I would have missed it, but everybody over there in England was so friendly, and they don't go on vacation; they go on holiday, and so everybody's saying, they could. I was pegged as an American. Oh, what are you doing over here on holiday? I'm a priest on sabbatical, and I'm going around to these different churches. And one day, this guy says, "Oh, you need to go to St. Leonard's and Hythe, Kent." And so, if you're ever over there, go to Hythe and St. Leonard's. It's worth the trip.
Now, you have Scottish ancestry, is that correct?
Right. So then the second part of it, my wife and I, I was in Kent for 2 weeks, then we were in London for a week, and then we took a train up and spent a month in a cottage in southern Scotland, that's kind of where my family roots were, specifically around Jedburgh, Scotland. So rather, when you think of Scotland, people think of the Highlands and all of that, but we were border Scots, and I mean, that's a whole nother show. But it was very cool though to go into all these cemeteries in that area, and every other tombstone have my family name on it.
Rutherford.
Yeah, in fact, a lot of old abbeys. In that area that were built kind of as a protection for southern Scotland from the English, and of course King Henry VIII went in and destroyed a lot of them. But the ruins themselves are beautiful. But my family supported Jedburgh Abbey, and it's even in its ruins, it's beautiful. And just to go around the different graves and graveyards and.
What's your wife's name? First name?
Lydia.
Does Lydia support this fascination with graveyards?
Yeah, she's maybe not as enthusiastic as I am, but she finds it interesting. Yeah.
So she tags along. Sometimes.
Sometimes. I just anytime that I'm around visiting a church and there's a graveyard, I go
there.
in and kind of poke around and see what's. And I would say, too, that the title of my presentation is Only Sleeping. And where it kind of started was in my little town of St. Paul, Indiana. 2 blocks behind my house was a cemetery. And when I was a little kid, the back part of it was kind of hilly and had a road around it. But then there was this flat part up near the front, near the entrance, and there wasn't very many. They were just starting to bury people in that flat part, and but so being 2 blocks away, it was like a playground for me, and so I'd go there, and a bunch of kids, and we'd play wiffle ball and fly kites, and having a hill, we would snow sled in the wintertime, and I even built a go-kart and went down, the hill the road that leads there. And I've got a lot of family buried in there. But one of the things that fascinated me was that there's one particular tombstone in that graveyard that just got the name and the dates, but then it says Only Sleeping. And as a young child, I thought, well, no, they're dead. Why would it have Only Sleeping? But then, as an adult and studying the Bible, I've learned that that's kind of a biblical passage, something that Jesus had said. And so, and it kind of makes sense now, that we're, that we Christians believe that, yes, we die, but if we die in faith, that, we're going to go to heaven and we're waiting a promised resurrection. And so, in a sense, we're kind of only sleeping.
We're going to talk about some of these symbols, what they mean, including broken tree trunks, torches upward and downward, and serpents on a stick. Sounds like something from the fall festival, doesn't it? Serpents on a stick. But first, let's talk about the skull and crossbones, the Latin term memento mori. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That kind of...
remember thy death.
Yeah, or kind of reflecting on your own mortality, right?
Right. And usually it's related to skull and crossbones. And, it is what it is. Remember thy death.
Mm-hmm. And I think Socrates said the proper practice of philosophy is about nothing else but dying and being dead, memento mori. Remember that you will die. It's a morbid thought, but there's a message there to live your best life.
Well, and if you think before the thought of resurrection of the dead, there was immortality. Everybody wanted to be immortal, not just, there was, okay, how can I live forever, but how can I be remembered forever? And so you live the good life and you give to society, and then you're remembered. And you got to remember that in ancient peoples, that they could recite their genealogy, back generations and generations and, hundreds and years. And that was even before anything was written down of the genealogies in the Bible. That was all oral before it was actually written down. And so...
Now, the skull and crossbones symbol, did you see that in the cemeteries in Boston as well as overseas?
That was the first place that I saw it. I didn't see the memento mori, mm-hmm. but I saw the skull and crossbones, and I thought it was cool and creepy. But then I saw it a lot in England and Scotland, and very old. Those go back to almost Puritan, 1600s and 1700s.
Mm-hmm. Well, you even see that on the pirate flag, the skull and crossbones.
Right. You would expect it on a pirate flag, but you wouldn't expect it on somebody's gravestone.
That's right. That's what kind of threw me, too. Now, before we go into some of these more unusual symbols you've seen, let's learn more about Allen Rutherford, your journey to the ministry, and you... I guess were trained as a graphic artist. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. I always wanted to. Growing up, I either wanted to be a Roman Catholic priest or an artist. And it's funny. My grandmother, she would saw me drawing pictures, and she would say, "You stop drawing those pictures and work on your math, because you'll never make a living drawing pictures." But I had a 17-year career as a graphic designer and art director in Indianapolis, and then I just felt that a tug and call to ministry, and I wanted to be a family man growing up, but so I knew that I wasn't going to be a Roman Catholic priest. But then when I changed to the Episcopal Church, it was like, I can do that, and God was kind of calling me again. And when I started out as graphic design back in the 80s, it was all on the drawing board and markers and T-squares and all that kind of stuff. And I was specialized in airbrush photo retouching. But then the computers came along and kind of took all that over. And while I could do some awesome and cool stuff that on the computer, it was just something about getting my hands dirty and doing it by hand that just, I don't know, I kind of, as God closes one door and window opens, and so I felt the call back to ministry. And so my wife allowed me to, take classes and go to seminary, and I was ordained to the priesthood in 2005 and was called to this Mount Vernon and St. John's. And when they called me and they said, "Would you like to come and be our next priest?" I said, "Absolutely." I said, "You need to think about it." I said, "Nope."
Well, now, Lydia, your wife, how did you two meet?
We worked in a little mom-and-pop grocery store in Shelbyville, Indiana. called, back then it was Ranch Supermarket. And she was cute. But there was this, I was a stock boy and a carry out. It was kind of a full service, little mom and pop. So we stock boys we didn't like the cashiers very much, and because they, took us away from our duties and things and pestered us. But Lydia was just too cute to. And then so after working together for about a year or so, I finally got up the nerve to ask her out, and we went out on a first date, and which was kind of horrendous because I had a broken fan belt on the way out on the date, and so I kind of said, okay, God, if she sticks around for this car repair, I'm going to marry her. And so that was so we were married in 1983, and so we're 38 years into this arrangement, this marriage.
Well, tell me about the rest of your family.
I have 2 children. Amanda lives in Indianapolis. She's 35 now, and my son Dylan, he lives over in Clarksville, Indiana. He started out as a graphic designer, went to art school, but then all of a sudden he found out about management in Waffle House, and now he's a manager of a Waffle House in Sellersburg, Indiana. So
near the convenience store, were you? Where was the convenience store you worked at? Shelbyville.
Shelbyville.
Okay, Shelbyville. Okay.
Yeah.
I thought maybe you were in the same town
No,
there.
no.
Okay. Any other people in your family in the clergy?
No.
Really?
No.
Was that shocking to others?
Well, I grew up in a traditional Roman Catholic family where my grandmother, she prayed every day that one of her grandsons would go into the priesthood, and so little late, but yeah, Grandma, and I'm not a Catholic priest. Sorry, Grandma, but
did she have pictures of Jackie Onassis in her house and John Kennedy and not Jackie, but I remember there being a picture of John F. K. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I noticed that in most Catholic households you'll find that older Catholic households.
Yeah,
I know my grandmother, she had all those pictures in her room.
Yeah, and the other joke I have about being Roman Catholic, worshiping all the saints, worshiping to the saints, or asking them to pray for you and so on. That now that I'm in a Protestant faith, that I think back to my childhood, and my parents and grandparents were at the back door letting all the saints in while Jesus was at the front door knocking. Okay, let's talk about the history of St. John's Episcopal Church. I've been there. It's a beautiful church in a really nice kind of quiet neighborhood there off the main drag there in Mount Vernon. A very peaceful setting, and it's a lovely church. Yeah, we're known in the community as the little white church with the red door on the corner of 6th and Mulberry Street.
That's pretty good.
And in most Episcopal churches, if you go into a town, you see a sign that says, "Welcome to the Episcopal Church." But then if you see a church that has red doors, the chances are great that's an Episcopal church.
And when was this church founded?
The congregation was founded on June. A group of gentlemen came together and formed a charter on June 4th, 1855. And then they worshipped in homes and other churches that would, accommodate them. And then they finally built the current church, started the foundation in 1892 and completed it in 1893. And it's, kind of a long, rough history of the church. In the 20s, when there was kind of a downcline in Christianity, they were kind of struggling to get priests in, and so they had their doors closed for a couple of years. But then there was a kind of return to faith, and then the church opened back up again, and so it's just been plugging along ever since.
And you said it's a Carpenter style?
It's a Carpenter Gothic.
Carpenter Gothic.
Right.
Explain that.
Well, there's back about that time there was a lot of like neo-Gothic or Gothic churches, but those are mostly stone churches. But Carpenter Gothic is a wooden church that has that style.
And St. John, the namesake of the church, and his symbol is an eagle, I understand.
Right, exactly. If you all of the different Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, they all have a symbol that goes with them, and John happens to be the eagle.
Mm-hmm. And you have an eagle in one of the stained glasses?
When I came in 2005, they were celebrating their 150th anniversary, and the church on the inside had amber glass windows, and on the back behind the altar table up on the wall there was a three-paneled window that had the amber glass in it, and they raised money to get a stained glass window in there. And a lot of people, when they look at it, they think that it's Jesus, but it's St. John's from the Book of Revelation on the exiled on the island of Patmos, writing the Book of Revelation. And off in the distance, you see this little bird that's an actual eagle. And then after they completed that, then they said, well, can we put stained glass windows in the other windows in the church? And so we did a little research, and it was going to cost about $3,000 to $4,000 a piece. And so, various families, started paying for the windows, and we worked with Sunburst. I don't know if they're in business anymore in Newburgh, and using my graphic design skills, I worked with them to design, what the windows would look like. And so the north side of the church is all Old Testament, and it has like a scroll, for the Old Testament. And then all of the ones on the south side of the church are stories of Jesus from the Gospel of John. And so there's a little medallion up there and that has the little eagle on those.
So let's go back to the graveyards and the cemeteries. And if you wander through a burial ground, you may find out maybe a Star of David, a Latin cross, a Celtic cross, a Trinitarian cross, or an IHS symbol. What's this Trinitarian cross? I'm not sure what that is.
Well, anything that is either like cloverleaf or three-pointed, it's the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. So that's what that Trinitarian symbol.
All right.
And another one that you'll see a lot of that's Trinitarian is ivy, because it's three-pointed, and that's kind of a symbol.
Okay. And of course, tombstones do tell a story. I know in your presentation you show children's graves. They're kind of unique sometimes.
Right. There's some that have like a child. It's almost like a little tomb above the ground, but it's got like a child sleeping on the top of it. Mm-hmm. Or there's ones that they'll have like a little lamb.
Okay.
And then also there'll be a little tree stump with a name on it, and the little tree stump is kind of life cut short. And you also see those with like young adults or people that they feel that their life has been cut short. Or over in England, you can just tell that it's a very small grave and a cross, and a lot of those have flowers planted in and around them that they care for, all year long. And they'll have like a little cherub angel, watching over the child, and so
there are garden cemeteries, aren't there?
Yeah.
You go into a cemetery and they tend it with gardens. Mm-hmm. They don't have to mow them, I guess. That's right. That's one way to do it. Now, we've talked about necrotourism. That's visiting cemeteries and graveyards to explore the statuary, history, genealogy, famous grave sites. So what are some memorable cemeteries or graveyards you visited?
I I mean, not any one in particular, other than, like I said, Boston, and I've just been in too many.
Too many to have a favorite, huh?
Right,
Okay.
right.
Now, I know Crown Hill Cemetery in Indianapolis. That's,
I
that's
have
huge.
poked around in there, yeah.
That is a massive place. That covers a lot of land, too.
And there's a lot of famous people.
John Dillinger.
Yeah.
Well, infamous maybe.
And that's kind of been called into question lately. You know, I think the last I heard, maybe even the family was questioning that, and as to whether he was actually buried there. I don't know.
But I guess sure the cemetery like to have that story, corroborated. That they like the tourists, I guess,
yeah.
coming in there. Okay.
You know, the other thing that you can always kind of tell. I always gravitate towards some of the bigger ones. Of course, most of those are well-to-do people, but they're really elaborate and have a lot of different symbols on them. And
Cemeteries in Mount Vernon. Tell me about those.
There actually there's one that the Historical Society has worked on over the last 10 years or whatever. There was an old grave yard up on a hill behind what's now Hedges Community Center. It used to be Hedges Elementary School, but they found that there was a graveyard or cemetery there, and they did some research and kind of figured out who some of the people were buried there, and some of the tombstones had been knocked over and so on. So they have put those back up, and they've got a fence around it now, and so they've taken care of that. Of course, Bell Fountain Cemetery, that's where most of the people that I've buried in my 16 years of ministry there. And then there's just some other ones that are around. But also, too, as I've been just driving around the county, I've found places just kind of off the road where there's tombstones. And so, yeah, we think about cemeteries and we think about, graveyards connected to churches. But, we have to think, too, that people would often have little cemeteries or
like family plots
mm-hmm. on their homestead. Mm-hmm. And so one of them that I am an avid hiker and outdoorsman, and I remember hiking through Morgan Monroe State Forest near Martinsville, and right out in the middle of the forest was this group of gravestones. And I'm sure that at one time there was a homestead there. And just, over the centuries that Mother Nature has kind of reclaimed. But it looked like, though, that, somebody, graveyard societies, that know where they're all at in a particular county have gone in and while they had not removed the trees, they've at least made sure that the tombstones were well taken care of.
Strange to us now, but I guess meaningful and powerful when they were carved out of stone centuries ago. People knew what they meant then.
Right. Mm-hmm. Some of the more interesting ones that I have run across, are angel heads, the different, some look childlike, and some of them that I saw over in England were almost adult and macabre looking, but they got the angel wings there, and
mm-hmm. Well, there were definitely craftsmen involved in putting together these markers.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it was all hand. You think today, you could just about do anything with a laser etcher, but back then it was all handcrafted.
Well, that must have been how these were artisans, and they had apprentices, and I think probably in the family. They're probably generations of these stone carvers.
Oh, I bet.
Mm-hmm. So let's run down some of these symbols now. Many archaic, not commonly known. So, okay, if you see a serpent on a stick on a tombstone, what does that mean, Rutherford?
Well, that goes back to a biblical story when Moses was leading the Israelites in the wilderness. That of course, they were grumbling against God, and God would get angry at them and send some kind of plague or punishment upon them. And so one time when God was getting a little tired of them and they're grumbling, he sent these poisonous snakes among them. And of course, then they, asked Moses to pray to God, to take away the snakes. And so God directed Moses to craft this bronze serpent wrapped around this stick, or like a cross kind of thing. And God said, anybody that, looks upon that, if they've been bitten, they'll get cured. And so that kind of became eventually an idol, and Jesus even mentions it in his gospel, that where Moses had you look up at the stick with the bronze serpent, now the Son of Man is going to be lifted high, and so that serpent on a stick shows up on gravestones as, if you look up, if somebody visiting their grave, looks upon them, maybe they'll be cured of their diseases, or,
Really?
And it's a sign of faith.
Okay. Okay, what does a broken tree trunk mean?
Well, that kind of goes back to that, the child graves of the stumps, that it's a life cut short, that somebody who maybe in their prime of life got ill and died, or died of an accident. And so, and then of course the kind of tree that it is makes a difference too. If it's you can see that it's clearly an oak tree, then it's it's a person that was of strength. Oak is strength. And if it looks like that it's like pine or cedar, that's like an evergreen, so it's everlasting life.
Now, palm fronds.
That kind of goes back to that Jesus' entry into Jerusalem, where it says they took their cloaks and spread them on the ground and put palm fronds. And so it just has to do with life and immortality,
And I guess showing their faith.
and showing their faith. Yes.
What about roosters? That's unusual.
Roosters is life, is virility, vitality, and a rooster is vigilant. It's a guard animal.
That's
So
true.
it's if you've got a rooster is kind of vigilant, guarding the grave. Same with one picture that I have is of a lion, that it's a tomb that has a lion, sleeping lion on top of it, and that's courage and vigilance, and so the lion is protecting.
Definitely. Okay. Hourglass.
You can see hourglasses. They're either, most of them are on their side, but then there's some that are standing up. But we think of the sand in an hourglass, that, and so it's just a symbol that your time is up on this earth.
Yeah. And you have empty chairs.
That that it just has to do with the
Person's no longer there.
person is no longer there, but then there's also seats and thrones, and sometimes there's angels sitting on them.
Grapes.
Grapes have to do with, Jesus' Last Supper, and this is somebody that's a believer, and so it's that they've been washed in the blood, that they're, and this is kind of the same with wheat shocks, or of wheat in a sickle, that the harvest has come, and somebody's death they've been, I won't say harvested, but that's kind of weird. But they've been taken up to heaven.
Seashells.
Seashells are from the beginning of Christianity, have been connected with baptism. Even today, when I baptize somebody, we do. We don't go to the river, and we Father, Son, Holy Spirit, sprinkling, but we use a seashell and bless the water, and then use that seashell to put the water on the person, to baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and But yeah, that's been a very ancient.
So that goes back to antiquity. Then,
it goes back to early Christianity, the seashell and baptism, and so that's usually a person that's been baptized.
Okay.
And even on children's graves, you'll see one in particular I have a photo of is a seashell with a small child kind of sleeping in the middle of the shell.
Okay, acorns.
Acorns are kind of go with that oak tree that that is kind of the circle of life.
Okay.
You know, from the mighty acorn from that little acorn comes the mighty oak.
Now you have also different types of tombs that you've took pictures of. The coffin tomb.
That kind of, when you think of, mummies and so on. Well, I think what I'm thinking of is the body tomb, and that it looks like there's almost like a body there, and it's
on top
kind
of the ground,
cylindrical looking.
And so there's a coffin beneath that one too.
Right. Yeah,
Okay.
that's put on top of it. But then they actually, whereas we think of the vault that goes, you put the vault down and then you put the casket in it and then you seal it up. But some of those they're like marble, and or some of them were even lime. Some of the older ones limestone, and they're above ground. And they're usually people of some prominence, that can afford that, and they've got gates around them.
Well, I noticed a lot of the pictures, these grave sites have fences around, little small fences.
Right. And those are just,
Just decorative or what?
No, I think it's just to kind of protect it from vandalism and to kind of set it apart.
Okay, and I know some of them have little gardens in the fences too.
Right, or they'll have like little stone barriers around them, and then a cross on one side, and inside of that little stone barrier, like wall or whatever. I mean, it's not very that they'll plant flowers. And I mentioned that with children, but adults. And I was there in May in southern England, so they were still having spring flowers. So some of the early flowers that indicate, like lily of the valley and crocuses and things that, that when we think of springtime and new life, we think of Easter and resurrection. And so...
Now, any symbols that stumped you?
No, I've been able to
research them
to find just about everything.
Well, how do you go about that research?
There are all kinds of websites and books you can get that have the different meanings of symbols, and my list was really just based on the photos that I took to kind of match up, but there's a whole lot more than what I have in my presentation.
Now, tell us about your presentation. Who do you present to?
Well, I mean, I have done in the past, pre-COVID, I would do a monthly presentation for my congregation, and that has something to do with faith, and so that was the first time that I gave it. And then I was asked, I'm a member of the Kiwanis Club in Mount Vernon, so I gave it to them. Then the Historical Society asked me to give the presentation to them, and another organization.
So you're getting the circuit there.
I'm kind of hitting the circuit with it, but I enjoy giving it. So if anybody out there wants to have me come, I'm more than willing to do it.
Now, at these presentations, what are some of the questions that you get from the people who are watching?
Well, kind of, have I been to any other places, and is there any places that are kind of on my bucket list? And
what's on your bucket list?
I think I would really like to. I've never been to New Orleans, and I've seen shows, based out of New Orleans, of the mausoleums and all the ritual that goes into.
And it's so low there too, so the markers are above ground.
Yeah, so I'd like to see some of those, and maybe I've not been to Arlington Cemetery,
Have you been to Savannah, the St. Bonaventure? I think Bonaventure Cemetery there. I think that's a classic one there too. I was there, and it's supposed to be one of the most haunted cemeteries in the country. So that might be another one too, and check out.
After seeing all the macabre things on symbols that I saw in England, Scotland, there is not much that would shock me.
Okay. So what have you learned about life, death, and faith by researching these symbols?
That we all have our what we believe about life and immortality and mortality and afterlife, and it's a lot of these aren't just faith. Some people of the graves I even saw over in England and Scotland, they were pictures of people's occupations. One of them that I have in my presentation was clearly a person that was a blacksmith and had horseshoes and an anvil and the implements, the tools. And that's also the same for seafaring people. You see boats and anchors and things of that nature, and people that were equestrian. You see horse kind of stuff, and so.
I'll talk about some of my cemetery adventures. I guess I'm a necro tourist. I'll raise my hand. I admit that. The Punch Bowl Cemetery in Honolulu is a classic one too. Ernie Pyle's buried there, and it's like a punch bowl. It's just like a dip in the ground there, and it's really really unique. And I've seen some cemeteries in Italy, the American war dead outside Florence, and just some beautifully manicured cemeteries there.
Right.
And they really take good care of them. And I told you earlier that I went to a cemetery in Ukraine, and the Jewish cemetery there was very unique because it was overgrown, and most of the Jewish population was wiped out by the Soviets and the Germans, but there are a few people that go to the Jewish cemetery, and they put stones on the grave sites. That's a symbol of respect. So I thought that was interesting too. So there's a lot we can learn by going to cemeteries.
Sure, there is. And another one that kind of stuck out to me, that I didn't have a picture of it in my presentation, but I think it was in Pentham in Kent, England, that on it said that this gentleman had served. He was in the British military, and he had been wounded at the Battle of Bunker Hill in the American Revolution, but he had survived and went back and lived his life. But I thought it was curious to see that notation of recognition of somebody that had fought in America and had lived to tell about it. And
so, like you said, you have a bucket list of cemeteries you'd like to see. Is this kind of like on your when you plan your vacation? Do you try to plan it around a cemetery?
Well, if I can squeeze them in, yes.
Okay.
Because I like churches, and churches have cemeteries, and in my occupation, obviously I'm asked to. And so, I've not just buried in Mount Vernon, but I'm here in Evansville and out at Sunset. And so, I always take time to kind of walk around and see what.
Well, Oak Hill Cemetery is a classic cemetery right here in Evansville, too. Some incredible mausoleums there and statuary. It's amazing, and you can tell the wealth of the family definitely by the size of the monuments.
There was one church it's in my presentation. It's a marker in the floor of a church of a small parish, and clearly somebody of great wealth had this done. And down at the bottom of it, it says something to the effect of, wealth doesn't make any difference. We all, we can't take it with us, and we all die poor. And but I thought how ironic it was that they would talk about you can't take it with you, we all die poor, but yet this was a person of great means who had the wealth, and the family had the wealth and the ability to have this marker put in the floor of the church. Whereas I was another thing that really fascinated me was talking about immortality and being remembered. All of the tombstones over there, some of the very oldest ones were done in like sandstone or limestone, and which is, doesn't hold up to weather very well. And so I can't tell you how many hundreds of tombstones that I saw just leaning up against churches that you couldn't make out. They were so washed away, you couldn't tell, who they were. And then there was another church that I had been in the church, and then I was walking back to my car, and something seemed odd about the sidewalk, that the stones had interesting shapes. And then it dawned on me that they had taken those old tombstones and had used those to make the sidewalk.
Mm-hmm. Because they had no more markings on them, I guess.
Right.
Wow. I think I found that verse you were talking about dating back to 1662. Who has his birthday has his burial too. As we into this world come out we go. Why boast of our wealth, what land we have, we all at length land in the grave.
Right.
And you read those things as you go by, and they hit home, don't they?
Right. And that's another thing that caught me was even in more modern tombstones, even if they don't have symbols, a lot of them will have poems or sayings about the person's life or their faith and their belief in life. And some of them are very interesting.
Well, a lot of the modern ones are very secular too. They'll have maybe the sports team that this person liked, or their favorite car.
Or around here you see tractors.
Yeah.
Or I've seen people that are motorcycle enthusiasts that their whole tombstone is like a stone motorcycle. Mm-hmm. But with modern, etching technology and the tools that we have, you can do just about anything with, to make a gravestone.
We were talking about memento mori, isn't it? Mori?
Yeah.
Okay, mori. We're all going to die. So, any symbols you want on your tombstone?
Well, actually, my wife and I have already taken care of that. But it was funny that we kind of had this argument for quite some time that she wanted to be cremated, but I wanted to be buried, and I wanted to be buried in my family's cemetery, behind our old house and so on. And so I got invited to do a funeral service here in Evansville, and I think it was out at sunset. And they had been told ahead of time that they'd been cremated. And so when I went to the cemetery, I went out to where their columbariums are, and there was nobody there. And I couldn't figure it out. So as I was driving back to the main office, I saw this group of people all gathered around, this gravesite. And I went up to the office and I said, "So where are they being buried?" And they said, "Oh, well, let's see that group of people down there." Yeah. So I go down there, and they've already got the tombstone, and they've got this little square hole in the ground, and in this box it's got the cremations. And so, they were being buried in the ground with a tombstone marker. So I went home, and I said, "All right, Lydia, I've got it all figured out." I said, we're going to be cremated, both of us. We're going to buy one plot, one headstone, and then, we'll just be buried in the ground, and so we'll both get our wish. And so then we go through all of this, and she says, "But what if I want to be buried with some of my family in Shelbyville?" And I said, "Well, we could do that. We could just have the ashes split. We could buy another plot and another headstone, and it'd be twice the cost." And she said, "No, we don't do that because we're both kind of frugal." But we had on ours in the middle, we have a heart. Mm-hmm. And then it's got interlocked wedding rings and our wedding date on there. So,
well, you got it all planned out.
So we got it. We can't get divorced. We got to stick together.
It's set in stone.
It's set in stone. There you go. The other funny story about that was we had went and made all these arrangements in July of 2014, but I got a photograph from the Tombstone, or the company, the stone company, on Valentine's Day, that's showing me that yes, it had been put in place. And so I went around telling everybody that I had gotten Lydia this big rock for Valentine's Day, and of course their mind went to thinking I'd gotten her this diamond.
Sure.
I said, "Oh, I got a picture of it on my phone." And they're like, "Well, what's that?" I said, "Yeah, that's our tombstone. That's the rock I got her for Valentine's Day."
Oh, boy. Well, did you survive that? I guess you did. Okay. My guest has been Reverend Allen Rutherford, rector of St. John's Episcopal Church in Mount Vernon, Indiana. And a reminder, memento mori, live your best life now before it's too late.
Right.
Good advice. All right. I'm David James, and this is 2 Main Street, presented by Jeffrey Berger of Berger Wealth Services at Bayard Private Wealth Management.